You're listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by Nax.
Welcome to Convenience Matters. My name is Jeff Leonard, and on Convenience Matters, we talk about things that matter to convenience stores. If they matter to convenience stores, they matter to pretty much everyone out there because we get about 160 million customers every single day, and we touch a lot of different angles related to convenience.
And I'm Donovan Woods with the Fuels Institute and Nax, and I'm happy to be here as we have a couple of really good guests today, Jeff. And the first one is, well, both of them will be here, but it'll be Tammy Klein from Future Fuel Strategies and also Jeff Wood at the Overhead Wire. I've worked with both of them in our recent Fuels Institute annual meeting, and I just had to have them on for the podcast because it was one of our most highest rated sessions. It was entertaining. They know the topic of urbanization and what's happening in the industry. So welcome, both of you. How are you?
I'm doing great. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
No problem. Thanks for being here, guys. I had a good time at our annual meeting just a few months back, but again, your topic really stuck with me personally. We can get into the details on liquid fuels and things like that, but there are some of us that like to find out about what's happening in the marketplace, what's happening on a different level. And one of those is the trend that we're seeing towards more people moving towards urban areas, towards the downtown area. I'm a suburban guy, so I don't see it. I feel like, well, everyone should be here where there's green grass and my dog can walk free. But is that what you're really seeing nationwide?
Well, I'll jump in first. I mean, I'm coming at it from the transportation fuel side of it, and I never really gave a lot of thought to, to urbanization issues before. I think about market and policy issues related to fuel. So, and one of my clients jokes like, since when did you become an expert in urbanization? But I think that is an underlying, from what I'm seeing, and for the issues that I'm covering for my client base, that's a huge, huge issue because by 2050, 70% of us in this entire world, so the 7 or 8 billion of us, or 9 billion of us, I believe, will be living in an urban area. And the reason for that is, that people are going where the jobs are, especially in, emerging economies. So with that, and we're already seeing this, and I know Jeff is seeing this and following it too from his perspective, but from the fuels perspective, that there's some really deep ramifications there because with 70% of us in cities, city managers are already beginning to, and politicians and policymakers, not only at the city level, but also at the state or provincial and federal levels are beginning to really think about this because with so many of us living in cities, you have air pollution, which is already a big problem in many countries, including in this one as well, and mitigating climate change and just controlling or better mitigating, congestion, actually moving people from place to place. In many cities, many of these large cities around the world, that's where the folks are going to be living, the Tokyos, Paris, New York, Los Angeles, Houston. So the thought is to try and figure out how to move people around. And from a fuels perspective, there could be some interesting ramifications for demand down the line. And that's something that fuel retailers, refiners, the auto industry, we all need to begin to understand and get to grips with.
Yeah, and it's also really interesting from an employer standpoint because the employers are starting to think about how to attract the next generation of employees. So you have companies like GE moving from Connecticut to downtown Boston because it's right next to a transit station or because it's in that kind of dense area where a lot of quote unquote millennials, I don't like to split these people out into groups, but it's the easiest way to do it. Millennials are interested in those types of jobs, and attracting talent is now the biggest thing. It's not the comfort of the it's not the comfort of the executives anymore. It's the comfort of the employees and the smarts that you're trying to attract. You see that in a number of different places in Chicago and San Francisco and in Boston, even New York City. But then there's an opposite trend too as well. I mean, Exxon, for example, is moving out of downtown Houston and into the suburbs. So you have that movement as well. And I think they're making the wrong bet from my perspective. But you see So you see it going both ways, but I think the trend is going to continue to be moving, employers moving into downtown areas, or at least into more urban areas from more suburban places. And you see this kind of reflected in some of the office prices in places like Washington, D.C. and the suburbs as well. So we'll see this kind of movement away from the suburbs and into the cities, although suburbs will continue to be a major part of growth as we know housing in these places is also super expensive. So there's this kind of disconnect between the employment and the housing sectors.
When we look at what we call cities, Tammy, what is the definition of cities that you're using when you talk about 70%? Are we talking about 100,000 people and above, or what is the dynamic in terms of population?
Well, the definitions I'm using in that case, the statistic that I'm citing actually comes from the United Nations, and the United Nations has different definitions. But most of the cities that I'm talking about, when I'm talking about cities, I'm thinking like what they call mega cities, and mega cities are those cities that have, I believe, 10 million or more people. So you have these cities, already very large cities like Tokyo and New York, that are already sort of in that category. And then you have a number of other cities that by 2050 will move into that category. And many of those cities are in other parts of the world, like India and so forth, India, China, number of cities there, but also some cities here as well that are becoming larger and larger. So when I'm thinking about that population number, what I'm generally thinking about are those mega cities. So the cities, that's the other factor here is, there are those suburban that we didn't talk about it, a little bit earlier, I didn't mention earlier, but there are also those cities that are suburban areas that are becoming engulfed or becoming their own larger city. So it's there's different definitions out there, but the one that I'm using, comes from the UN and really focuses on that mega city idea of these cities that are becoming 10 million or more strong, and we're going to see a lot more in the coming years.
Yeah, I noticed. The reason I asked the question is I sat in a presentation a week or so ago, and somebody was showing the U.S. map and showing where the biggest cities are and biggest population, and I can't recall what the population density that was selected. In Washington, obviously, was a suburb, etc. But it's a tiny amount. When they light up that map and they show where the densest populations are, it's not very much, and to constitute that many people. And the next slide was a slide of here's where Amazon is putting its resources. And it was a direct overlay. And you could see the implications that could be out there for retailers, for fuel retailers, how other retailers are looking at urban markets as a huge opportunity. And how does that present an opportunity or threat to convenience retailers and other small formats? So I guess that's a question for both of you. What can be the opportunity and the challenges for fuels retailers and for those small format stores, whether they're in those areas or not in those areas?
I'll defer to Jeff first on this one, and then I'll chime. I keep going first.
Well, I think there's a huge opportunity from a transportation standpoint, because what you're going to see is at the dawn of the age of autonomous vehicles in the next 20 years. It's not going to happen right around the corner, but in the future, I think you're going to see transportation hubs take off. Here in San Francisco, we see a lot of gas stations converting to condos, but that doesn't mean that there's not a necessity for convenience stores and corner stores and those types of things. I think just the access is going to change. So you're going to see more people arriving by bike or by walking or by transit or even autonomous vehicle to these stores if it's not close to a grocery store. So you're going to see kind of a change in the access in these larger cities where the property values are such that really an urban gas station or an urban convenience store doesn't make a lot of sense on its own piece of property, but it's going to be a part of a larger mixed-use development. And here, right by my house, actually, there's a gas station that's going to be turned into 4 or 5 stories of condos, and this station has been here for a really long time. And right now, it serves as the hub for all of the Zip cars in the vicinity, and all of the get-arounds and all of the different vehicles that people can rent because they decided to get rid of their cars. And so I think you're going to see opportunity for transportation hubs from the convenience stores as well. And this one might be disappearing, but it might also reincarnate itself. So there's an interesting future that's coming that we really don't know what the future looks like, but there's possibilities out there for convenience stores to take up a new mantle, as they move forward.
Yeah, I agree with that. I mean, in the short term, with more people driving, fuel demand up. I mean, there's fabulous opportunities there on the short term. In the longer term, I agree with Jeff on this hub idea, and maybe one iteration. And also, we really don't know what the future is going to be like. But in the midterm, transportation hub could be, on one step on that evolutionary chain, could be that, mixed fuel format store, that would have, maybe some charging stations, and, there would still be some conventional fuels. Because again, no matter what you see or say, what you hear said about, the electric vehicle revolution, we are going to have internal combustion engines, and we are going to have internal combustion fuels. The proportions, I agree, will go down over time as, electric vehicles reach parity, in terms of total cost of ownership with internal combustion engine vehicles. But they're going to be around for a while. So we are going to need gasoline, we are going to need diesel, and we might see, other fuels as well. So maybe that's one step, in this evolutionary chain where you'd begin to see, the, typical convenience store. So the convenience store that I love, which is close in my hometown, is Racetrack. So the Racetrack is already kind of seen as a hub, as a meeting place. It's very nicely appointed. There's not one lady friend I have that doesn't love the Racetrack. There are tables, there's, frozen yogurt, you can get coffee, and then you could see, with all the fuel offerings that they have, that there might be a mixed fuel offering on our way towards this autonomous vehicle concept that Jeff is talking about. So from the retailing format, or a retailing perspective, I think that there are a lot of opportunities out there.
Now, Tammy, you gave a definition. I think Jeff Leonard asked a question about how many people make up a city center, or a mega city, as you described it. I love talking about this. So I'm a little confused, because it seems like a city like New York, let's say 10 million people, or Tokyo, you talk about those. I can visualize that. But I live here in the D.C. metro area, and I'm seeing signs for new residential buildings or residential housing coming up in Winchester, which is probably 60 or 70 miles away from D.C.
Wow.
But the ads say, the newest developments in the D.C. metro area are coming up. Now, if you're not from the area, you go, wow, that's great. But I'm a longtime resident, and that is not a commute anyone wants to make. So what really defines a city? Is it going to be just Washington, D.C., or 15 miles out? Does it also include Fairfax and Arlington? Does it change what the definition of what a city is going forward?
Well, that depends on whose definition you're using. I mean, there's different ones. You're right. Like, where does the city boundary? There's the city, and then there is the metropolitan area. And I forget what the UN's is, but I mean, there's all kinds of ways that you can categorize, what defines a city and what a city is. Gosh, Jeff, I don't know if that's something that you might actually know a little bit more about there.
I don't have the numbers on the top of my head, although I do know that, cities are basically economic catchment areas. So, I mean, in metropolitan regions. So, from the census here in, the United States, we have the CSA, the Combined Statistical Area, and the MSA, the Metropolitan Statistical Area. And so, for example, in San Francisco, in the Bay Area, obviously San Jose and San Francisco are in the same kind of larger mega region, but they're also different MSAs. Now, this isn't something that happens in most places. So they combine them into a larger kind of mega region, but it's all a place where economic engines are connected to all of everything else. So, Donovan, your neighborhood might be growing and sprouting, and those people might be in the region, but they're connected economically to the region, even if they're not connected to specifically downtown DC or even downtown Baltimore. As those two regions start to merge together, this is an economic region, not necessarily a region just based on space. It's where people interact in terms of commerce. So, these are the places where things happen, where people, interact economically. They're going to buy goods and services that are going to be connected to the downtown in some form or fashion, but not necessarily everybody's going to be connected. So you see these boundaries kind of sprawling further and further out. And, it was interesting because you also, a couple of years ago, there was a really interesting, I don't remember where the article was, but somebody had placed pieces of slime mold in a petri dish that looked like the employment centers in Tokyo, and watched the connections between the different slime molds germinate for for a few weeks. And what happened was that recreated the road system for Tokyo between these two things. So you can see it in nature, and you can see it in the way our economic progress works in terms of connecting these places. So that's basically the bigger definition, is these places are connected economically. Whether you go downtown or not is somewhat not necessary, but you're connected in some form or fashion to this one single place, and so they're all a part of the larger space.
That was a terrific setup to what I was going to ask about, which is in the 1950s we had the creation of the suburbs because of the interstate highway system. That was a big factor. What is the big factor that's driving people towards the cities now? Is it roads again? What is the reason that the urbanization is so hot now? What is there, one or two trends or regulations that set this all up?
Well, from my perspective, it's the number one thing, which is, jobs and economic opportunity. If you're looking at this issue from a global basis, which I think the industry should, because there are markets, here in the U.S. and there are markets, in the emerging world, as well. So, from the global perspective, I think the number one issue is jobs and economic opportunity.
I mean, in the 50s and 60s and even maybe a little bit of the 40s, there was, the highway system was obviously a large incentive, but there was a ton of housing incentives as well for people to buy new houses and get away from downtowns and other places that were maybe a little bit more crowded in the 20s and 30s and so forth. So you saw a lot of incentives, not just the freeways, that were pushing people outward. And as we get to these economic regions that are so huge, and people, and I, like I mentioned in the previous response, these are big economic regions, and once you get to a certain point, there's a diminishing amount of access to opportunity when you get further out. So if you're on the furthest north edge of an economic region, you are going to have less access to more jobs. But the first ring suburbs that they were building before, they still had access to all of the economic opportunities in that major region. So in the future, what we're seeing is people are trying to trade back to get more time. They're tired of commuting so far to these jobs and gaining access. You'll see, people wanting to live closer to where the transportation systems will get them within that average 30-minute commute that is the average for most Americans, or under that. So, for a lot of people who work at home, they have like a 2-second commute, but then there's a lot of people that have the mega commutes as well. And somewhere in the center is that 30-minute average. So I think that, when people are trying to look for a place to work, they're looking for a good life. They're trying to minimize the amount of time they're spending in a car or on a bus or a train or wherever else, because they want to spend more time at home with their families. They want to have access to, amenities like the theater or something along those lines. I mean, we think of Houston as a super large. I mean, it's getting close to being the third largest city in the country, but it's very sprawling, and it's where I grew up. But going downtown to the museums and the theaters was a really big thing. The butterfly exhibit at the Natural Natural History Museum is amazing. But if you live 30, 40 minutes away, that's a weekend trip that you can only take once in a while, versus if you're living closer to town, you can get there and have more opportunities to see and be a part of that, of that group of people who is interested in natural history. So, we're seeing people trying to move towards experiences, trying to move towards economic opportunity versus moving further and further out just so they can have an extra couple bedrooms.
I think what Jeff is saying is really interesting, because that is my experience. When I was in my late 20s and 30s, my husband and I lived in the Washington, D.C. area. We lived in Alexandria. We bought a house in Alexandria, and the reason that we could have bought more house if we were willing to live outside the Beltway, but ultimately we chose a smaller house. It was probably a little more expensive, less house, but we felt that we had more quality of life, and that was in 1999. So I think that's I think that really resonates. I think there's a generational aspect in here as well. I mean, I think that resonates maybe with Gen Xers and maybe with baby boomers, but I think the issue that Jeff is also touching on that I think is important is experiences. And as part of sort of looking at this issue of cities and urbanization and what could that mean for the future of fuels and vehicles, both in the United States and globally, one of the things that I've really come across is demographics. And what I learned from a friend of mine who's out at USC in their energy research department. One of the things he was telling me is that millennials, but especially that generation coming up behind millennials, that's what they really want in their lives. They don't want to spend their lives in cars and kind of a slave to their bills and all these kinds of things. What they most value in life is not assets. What they value in life is experiences. And so I think that really dovetails nicely into what Jeff is saying. Is I think when you add that generational aspect in there, I think that's also another undercurrent driving urbanization. Is people want a quality of life, the younger generations specifically, and they want to be able to have experiences, and generally those experiences are going to be in the larger urban areas, butterfly exhibits or what have you.
Yeah, if I may add a kind of this Saturday, for example, here in San Francisco, I walked to my bagel shop. They know exactly what the bagel that I want because I've been going there for 10 years. I walk to the park and visit some friends who are having brunch. I take, the train over to, the Golden Gate Park where a friend is playing a piano because the Botanical Garden is having a show. Then I go a couple of blocks further and I go to a soccer game of the team that I've been supporting for the last 3 years. And then I take another bus back home and rest a little while before going to a bar that my friend operates. And these are the types of things that I don't have to stay at home for. I'm out and about, and so I don't need that extra space in my house to watch a big screen TV. I have all these opportunities to see people in my neighborhood, to visit my friends, and it's all a kind of a continuous spectrum of experiences throughout a whole day, a Saturday where the weather is really nice and we get to hang out. So I think these are the types of things that people are looking for if you're going into a new city and you make friends and want to have an experience, a third place, as it were, a place that's outside of your own home, where everybody knows your name, as it goes in Cheers, I guess.
Well, Jeff, I feel like you're judging my values as though having bills and sitting in a long commute. Yeah, I like my commute. I love my bills. I mean, time and fun don't mean anything to me. So, no, those are great points, and I
That's
agree.
where I grew up in Houston. I live that life. So.
Exactly. In the DC metro area.
I love my bills too. Just in case you were wondering, I'm with you.
They make me feel comfortable, like I belong. But it's interesting. We the Institute, we just released a publication at our annual event 2 months ago entitled Urbanization, the Effect of Urban Development on U.S. Vehicle Travel and Fuel Demand. And what it does is it kind of goes back to what Jeff Leonard was mentioning in terms of the history of how we got to where we are, interstates and where people live and why, and the entire history of mobility. It's a great reference if anyone wants to kind of go back and get a just a quick glance as to where we started, where we're headed, and really, as you mentioned also about autonomous vehicles, people may not think it's coming, but in due time, that will be here. So I definitely agree with you. Now, do you guys have anything you want to add in terms of your specific websites? I know you guys do great things. You're your own business owners, and you have the Overhead Wire, Jeff, and you have Future Fuel Strategies, Tammy. I've listened to your podcast, Tammy. I love it. Jeff, you know how much I feel about your wonderful videos on YouTube. So you want to give our audience anything they can find that's coming up soon that they may want to check out?
Well, sure. So my website is futurefuelstrategies.com, and I cover really the future fuels trends. So everything from biofuels, other alternative fuels, conventional fuels, electric vehicles, autonomous vehicles trends, mobility trends, all as it impacts fuel. So I have a blog, I have the podcast, thanks for the props on that, and I have a service where I delve into, it's more of a research service where I delve into these issues more deeply to sort of identify trends, competitive intelligence, things that kind of can help the fuels and vehicles industries really sort of prepare for the future, and really covers the globe. So, the issues that we're seeing here in the U.S. with respect to fuels, we're also seeing, abroad as well. And again, these are future markets. So, I'm trying to sort of keep my tabs and keep my fingers on that for readers and for the clients as well.
Yeah, and you can find me at a number of different places. If you want to listen to my podcast, it's Talking Headways on Streetsblog USA, and we have interviews with leaders in urbanism and transportation. Last week we had folks from Via, which is a ride-sharing company in New York City that does these mini vehicles where people can hail a ride and get to places in the city. I also have a show on YouTube that Donovan loves called Transit Trends, and the next episode will be coming out soon, I promise.
Excellent.
And then also, if you go to thedirecttransfer.com and you can sign up for my email newsletter at the top right of the site, I go through about 1,500 news articles every single day to pull out my favorite 30 on the topics of transportation and urban issues. So check that out if you get a chance. You can sign up for a free trial. It's quite an amount of information. Some people think it's like drinking from a fire hose. I'm glad to be on the other side of that fire hose. So,
well, thank you, Jeff, and thank you, Tammy. If I could summarize, urbanization is, if it's not coming, it is here, and the reason for it, of all things, it's because convenience matters. How's that? Somebody should get that website. Mm-hmm. Anyway, yep. Thank you for listening to Convenience Matters.
You've been listening to Convenience Matters, brought to you by NACS. For more information, go to nacsonline.com.